Okay, here we go with a look at a pair of Ruger 1022 bullpup stocks. This is the High Tower Armory 9022, and this is the Red Jacket ZK-22. In this video, I'm going to give you a close look at the two stocks. I'm going to show you how they compare to each other, and then briefly show you what they look like being shot out at the range. Before we get started, let's go ahead and perform a safety check and promote that safe habit. You can see that there's nothing in the magazine well. There's nothing in the chamber. Nothing in the magazine well. Nothing in the chamber. We're handling two safe firearms, so let's go ahead and begin. Now I have two separate videos on each of these stocks, reviewing them in more detail than you're probably going to get in this video. So if you're wanting to see the most amount of detail, watch those two videos separately. This video will kind of show you how they compare to each other. Let's start with availability. The Red Jacket stock came out first, and then the HTA stock came out. The HTA stock has been pretty available from what I've seen. I have never seen it out of stock. I've never seen the price go up because they haven't met the demand, and it's been reasonably easy to get. But with the Red Jacket stock, I don't know if it was the popularity of the TV show or if they just had a slow production rate, but I saw that stock go extremely expensive on eBay. I think, if memory serves, it was supposed to MSRP at something like 300 bucks, just under, and I was seeing it go for a lot of times $450, sometimes $5, and I think I've seen it go as high as $6 and above. So when there's lots of demand and there's few of them out there, people will bid each other up for it, and it was pretty hard to get, and that's why I had not previously reviewed this stock. I wasn't willing to spend $400, $500, $600 for it. I found this one at a pretty reasonably priced arms list listing with the 1022 already installed in the stock, so that's why I picked this one up. And I figured while I've got it and I'm reviewing it, I'll do a comparison video. When you're talking about a bullpup stock for the Ruger 1022, I think that controls start to matter more than other 1022 stocks. So you've got your charging handles, you've got your triggers, you got your safeties, your magazine releases. All of those are kind of important when it comes to a bullpup stock because all of them are like extensions. You don't really have access to much of anything original. You are now controlling the rifle's controls with the stock's extensions that are manipulating the original controls. You are no longer pulling the original trigger, you are pulling a trigger that is pulling the trigger. That's the case with both of these stocks. You're able to charge the charging handle, but you also have a extension here, and both of these are ambidextrous, so you can charge from the left or the right. And both of these charging handles are placed more forward than the original rifle's charging handle. Alright, so let's start by looking at the charging handles. With the High Tower Armory charging handle, it's a metallic design. This is all one piece, and it wraps around the underside of the barrel. It rides in two like little channel tracks here on each side of the stock, and it operates very smoothly. I like how forward it's placed. When you're firing the rifle, it's easy to just reach up, charge or clear a jam, return back to your supporting grip. You can see that the charging handle mechanism here has a little cutout, and that would allow for clearing jams. This is a very smooth operating design. Taking a look at the Red Jacket charging handle, you can charge from the right, you can charge from the left, you can charge from directly in front, but I don't like this design as well as I like the High Tower Armory charging handle. And here's why. It's got a polymer extension here, and it just kind of like freely sticks out the front here. And with it being polymer, you can see that it twists and torques a little bit more. And then it rests in this place. It doesn't shake around, but it can be manipulated and rattle a little bit. To me, I like the charging handle of the High Tower Armory. This one here is held in place by a spring inside the stock, and it keeps it in place. There's a spring powering this charging handle forward, and there is a little dimple in the top of this polymer one that kind of keeps it from just sliding forward and backwards. So now, even though I haven't had any trouble at all with either of these stocks charging from the right or from the left with the stock's charging handles, I do prefer the placement and the materials used and the design for the High Tower Armory's charging handle over the ZK-22's charging handle. Let's move on to the trigger here. The HTA-9022 has a pretty decent trigger pull. There's a little bit of pre-travel here, and then it's got a pretty crisp break. It's a little spongy, but you know, for a bullpup stock, it's pretty good, especially for a Ruger 1022 bullpup stock. It's not a bad trigger. But if you compare it to the ZK-22 trigger, you can see that there's not much travel at all, and it's a very clean break. There's not any sponginess to it, and it's just more responsive. It's a very, very nice trigger. And again, it's because of the design. Let me show you what it looks like inside the stocks. With the HTA-9022, it has a single rod traveling down the left side of the stock. This rod links up to the original rifle's trigger, and it pulls the trigger. Looking at the Red Jacket trigger's design, it has more of a flat bar kind of concept where it travels in a pair of tracks, one on the right and one on the left side of the stock, and then it actually wraps around the back side of the trigger guard, so there is a lot of guided movement here, and this mechanism actually kind of like bolts on close to the trigger. This is a really clever design that makes for a very smooth trigger pull. So as far as trigger pull is concerned, I'd have to favor the Red Jacket ZK-22 over the HTA-9022. So let's move on to the magazine release. You can see that the magazine release on the High Tower Armory 9022 kind of dips down below the profile of the underside of the stock. And because you're kind of rocking the magazine forward a little bit to withdraw the magazine, it makes for a very fluid, natural motion to change the magazines. And it's very easy to change the magazines with this enhanced magazine release. Now, if you feel like you might bump this too easily and unintentionally drop your magazine, you can actually pull this off to the side and withdraw this extension piece, and then you would have to reach up in here and change your magazines that way. So you have a couple options with the High Tower Armory 9022 magazine release, and this works very nicely. Looking at the ZK-22 stock, the magazine release has a button that you press up, and this button engages with the original magazine release, and that's kind of a clever design. You don't have to change out your trigger's internal components for a new magazine release. You just use what's already on your rifle, and this button here works with it. Now, showing you how easy it is to change the magazine, you press up on the button, pull down. Since you do have kind of that rocking forward motion, you do have, it's not as fluid as the HTA stock, but it works well. It's easy to change the magazine. So I would say that, again, with both of them, I don't have any issues with either of the design, but I would have to say that the High Tower Armory magazine release with it being kind of like a rock forward kind of deal, and you can change it up so it's a lower profile magazine release lever. I think that the High Tower Armory design is a little better. Let's look at the safety features of the stocks. With the High Tower Armory 90-22, you have your access to your original crossbolt safety. There's an extension clamp that kind of fits over your crossbolt, and then it sticks out past either side of the stock. So red for fire, black for safe. So you have the ability to actually put your rifle into safe. In addition to the crossbolt safety, you have a little rocker switch that disables the actual stocks trigger. So you can see the white S for safe, the red F for fire, and then for the trigger, there's a little pivot point that you have to pull this section of the trigger back before you can pull the trigger. And if you just pull on this portion of the trigger without rocking the safety portion back, the trigger will not engage and pull back. Taking a look at the ZK-22 safety features, there is no access to the original crossbolt safety. There is a little safety lever here that disables the movement of the stocks trigger. And then there's a little trigger mechanism here that you have to pull this back to get the trigger to go back. You cannot pull the trigger back without engaging this centerpiece first. When I first saw this little lever here, I thought, oh, I do not like that at all. I don't like the way it looks, but I actually like the way that it performs. It obstructs this trigger opening here. You can tell very easily that it's on safe, and it's easy to disengage and put it into fire. I do prefer to have access to my crossbolt safety though. I don't like the idea of only disabling the stocks trigger, because if you put it into safe, and supposedly the rifle's in safe now, if the rifle would be dropped, the firearm is still in fire. The actual rifle is still in the fire position. So although you've disabled the stocks trigger, if this gets dropped or bumped, it is more possible that this could fire than this would be if you had the crossbolt safety engaged. So as far as safety is concerned, I feel like the High Tower Armory has a better design than the ZK-22. One last control to consider is your bolt hold open switch. With the High Tower Armory stock, you have this switch here that if you pull your bolt open and press this button, you can hold your bolt open, and it also serves as an auto bolt release. And because of the design of the magazine release, you have no access to your bolt hold open switch with the ZK-22 stock. Let's talk about barrel accommodation. Both of them can accept the standard tapered barrel, and they have two inserts that center your barrel into that .920 bull barrel channel, and that's a similar design with the ZK-22. If you remove those inserts, you can use a .920 bull barrel with both of these stocks. But with both of these stocks, you need to be aware that you need to use an 18-inch or longer barrel. If you use the more commonly found 16-inch bull barrel, you will have to register this with the NFA as, I don't know, either a short barrel rifle or any other weapon, whichever is appropriate. Alright, so let's talk about the rails for these two stocks. They both come with the capacity for 3 rails, a top rail, and then 2 side rails, one on each side. The High Tower Armory stock ships with 2 side rails. They're 2 short Picatinny rails. And then the ZK-22 stock, as I understand it, it has the capacity to mount 2 rails. And you can see that I have the MOE Magpul polymer rails attached to the side of my ZK-22. Let's compare the upper rails. The HTA 90-22 has an aluminum machined rail, and it is attached to 1/2 of the stock. So this rail does not split apart when you disassemble the stock for cleaning. So that's one less thing that you have to take apart. You don't have to take your sights or your optic off of this stock to break the stock down. With the ZK-22 stock. It's a polymer design, and it's because this is a clamshell assembly, it splits right down the middle of your polymer rail. You will have to take your optic off every time you break your stock down to clean the rifle. Let's move on to the polymer materials that they use to make these stocks. The HTA-9022 and the ZK-22 both use polymer, and they're both a pretty solid material. It does have a nice feel in hand as far as the materials are concerned. The HTA has a little more of a texture feel to it, and the Red Jacket ZK-22 has more of a polished feel to it. Neither of them have much traction on the actual grips, but the actual surface of the HTA-9022 feels a little less slippery and smooth than the ZK-22 does. When you're talking about shouldering, the HTA-9022 has a little bit of texture on the backside of it, but the ZK-22 has no texture on the backside of it. It is as smooth as the rest of the rifle is. Another difference in the stocks, the ZK-22 leaves an opening to reveal your serial number, and the HTA stock does not. So let's finish up with talking about assembly and takedown. With these being clamshell designs, they are both a tremendous pain in the backside to put together and take apart. The HTA stock has 14 screws, and the ZK-22 has 13 screws, but because it splits down the rail, you have to take into account your optic, so that would be 14, 15, and then when I've got my screws in for my QD inserts, that's 16, 17, so there's 17 screws to break down for the ZK-22 the way I have it outfitted. So taking both of these stocks down for cleaning, if you're wanting to clean your rifle pretty regularly, I could see how you'd get really tired of all of those screws all the time. So I feel like there's a lot of pros and cons with these two stocks. If I had to recommend one over the other, I would probably recommend the HTA-9022 on the sole fact that you can access the crossbolt safety and make this rifle more safe than you can make the ZK-22. But I'm sure there's a big fan base out on either of these, and I certainly don't mean any offense in this video to anybody in pointing out the shortcomings of either of these two stocks. Alright, well, there's a close look at these two stocks and how they compare to each other. It's a big world out there, and we're bound to run into a shady situation. Until then, keep your gear on you.